Okay, good morning. Welcome, atheists, agnostics, and welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. We call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about from this podium. And I am really grateful to see everyone here today. Today we have a special guest, Graham Clumpner from Iraq Veterans Against War. And I'm just going to give him a brief introduction, and then he will speak a little about his experiences, and we'll have time for discussion. So Graham Clumpner joined the military after 9/11, hoping to serve his country in a time of war. And after basic training and airborne school, he attended the Ranger Indoctrination Program and was sent to a Ranger battalion. He did 2 tours overseas in support of the global war on terror. After leaving the military in 2007, he struggled with post-traumatic stress and alcoholism. The isolation that comes with being a veteran in this country compounded his experiences of war. And in fact, that's we had reached out to Graham because one of the questions that had come up a few times was, how do we support people that we know that are soldiers or vets? How do we help them as civilians? And so he's going to be a perfect person to speak to that. In 2008, the Army tried to call him back to active duty, and he went to the VA to seek medical treatment. After 9 months, the Army accepted the VA's judgment and honorably discharged Graham from the military. Since this experience, Graham has been working with Iraq Veterans Against War. He's an organizer, and he works to end militarism. He especially works with people who have PTSD and traumatic brain injury. And of course, the website for Iraq Veterans Against War is ivaw.org. So, thank you very much. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm going to talk for about 35-40 minutes, and then we'll open it up and have some discussion and questions and see where that takes us. Yeah, I guess I'll just spend a little bit of time talking. Do you all mind if I sit? This feels a little... I know you have to adjust the cameras, that's the only thing. Thank you.
When we do our discussion...
Smash hierarchy, you know.
When we do the discussion, can we do it in circle?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm from Bellingham. I was born in Bellingham, and I'm 31 now. And I grew up really coming of age in the 1990s, and at that time, it's a long time ago now, but I felt this incredible lack of purpose as a young person, and I was looking, my parents were both teachers, and we traveled quite a bit as a kid. And when I was 12 and 13, my father got a sabbatical, and that sabbatical was to go throughout from Australia all up through Asia and then Eastern Europe to do some studies with universities. And my mother and myself got to go along. And during that trip, I had a continual experience of meeting people who had been positively, according to them, positively affected by the United States military in the past. So for example, I met folks in South Korea. I met folks in China. I met folks in Germany and Poland that had stories to tell about how the first time that they were ever given shoes as a child was when Americans liberated their city, or the first time that they got to eat chocolate or had met a white person. And these were folks in their 50s and 60s who were in some cases thanking me as a 12 and 13-year-old for something that I had absolutely nothing to do with, right? But it had a profound impact because it made me choose to believe in a storyline about the United States that felt good. And that storyline went something like, we're the good guys, we liberate people, we go around and we make the world a better place by protecting people who can't protect themselves. And so when I turned 17, a couple months after that, 9/11 happened. And it was a crystallization of literally everything that I had come to believe up to that point about lack of purpose, and suddenly that purpose was on television. Suddenly I had a direction to take, and I had really something that was going to give me purpose and give me value in the world. And so at that time, the amount of people that were enlisting was so backlogged that I had to wait 1.5 years. So I enlisted, and I had to sit around in Bellingham and work menial labor jobs before I could get a chance to leave. And so I eventually left at the end of 2002 and started training in 2003, a couple of months before the Iraq War. And my framework at that point was that Osama bin Laden is a terrorist, and we should go find him, put his head on a pike, and bring him back to parades in New York City. It was pretty limited and pretty narrow-minded. You guys can laugh, don't feel like you're gonna be uncomfortable. And when I got into the military, I was pretty physically fit, and so I wasn't challenged by a lot of the physical challenges, but I was challenged by the abusive nature that happened within the military itself. It's a very hierarchical, top-down institution. It relies on people following orders and not questioning. Critical thinking is frowned upon. And those were all new concepts to me. But like a good young boy, I trusted that the adults knew what was going on and that they had our best interests in mind. And over the next 4 years, I came to learn that, in fact, for the most part, with some exceptions, very few people actually have any idea what's going on. These are folks who have had, in the U.S. military, have had a pretty limited, most of them have not attended college unless they're officers. Most of them have spent their entire careers in the military, and so have had this separation that you all have experienced between civilians and veterans, or civilians and active duty personnel. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that separation a little later, because it's actually quite intentional. It's not an accidental thing. But I did my first deployment in 2004 over the Christmas 2004-05 break. And I went to Afghanistan. And at that time, Afghanistan was calm. There was not IEDs blowing up on every road like there was in Iraq. And people felt like that was the safe word. So as I was an Army Ranger, my role in that deployment was to basically be a glorified SWAT team, hunting quote-unquote terrorists. So our jobs included, we would get information or intelligence from whether it was CIA or Army intelligence folks, and then we would go to somebody's house at 3 in the morning and try to detain them or arrest them, or if they shot at us, then to engage with them and take their lives. And what I found throughout that process was continually wrong addresses, people who didn't belong there, people weren't home. And I was part of a unit that is like the 2nd Army Ranger Battalion, which is at Fort Lewis, which is part of the Joint Special Operations Command. So they're considered to be one of the most elite units in the planet. And they get funding very intentionally, like they get a lot of money. We had very good equipment. We never had problem with body armor. We never had problem with ammunition or weapon systems. We got the best of the best equipment. And yet we were still unable to carry out our mission in a quote-unquote successful manner. And that raised a lot of questions for me. It made me start asking questions. And then when we would come back from missions and see, sometimes we'd have television at the main bases, and we would see like news on Fox or CNN or even MSNBC that was totally ass backwards of what had just happened like 2 or 3 days ago, and it would be like 18 terrorists killed in firefight. It was like, actually we dropped a bomb on a house accidentally and it was a bunch of children and women. So sitting in the chow hall with other soldiers, seeing this disconnect, basically began to create this cynical jaded viewpoint among a lot of us. And we got to a point where, so there's this phrase in the military, ours is not to reason why, ours is but to do and die. And the way that that translates is the US military actually has one of the lowest turnouts of voter populations in the United States. Soldiers don't vote, Marines don't vote, airmen, sailors don't vote. And the justification for this is that the US government is run by a civilian president, and the military shouldn't be meddling with that. There should be an intentional separation. And you all send us to democratically do what you want us to do. It's not for us to think about that. It's not for us to debate that. And so political debates were incredibly frowned upon. Even certain reading materials. I remember at one point during my second deployment, I had started reading Howard Zinn, and one guy was like smart enough to know what that was, and he, I'm like ridiculed me. I also read like Jared Diamond, like Guns, Germs, and Steel, and he was like, "What are you trying to learn history?" I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to understand why we're here. Yeah, that's part of it. But I mean, it was viewed as this. That's not our role. It's the American people's role to choose what the military does, and we go and carry that job out. And I really struggle with that coming from, like I said, parents who were teachers who encouraged me to think for myself and try to develop the best path forward. And so I think that some of those experiences, coming home and finding this incredible disconnect intellectually with what is actually going on. So for example, today, currently, actually last night, we dropped a bomb in Yemen, killed 4 people in a house. We're currently bombing 7 countries: Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq. I missed one, 2 more. Yemen. Anyway, we are literally at war in 7 different countries overtly, and we've got 173 countries with U.S. bases, over 750 bases around the world. And the American people are generally not aware of this. Now, part of that is media, and also, like we were talking a little bit earlier, I think part of that is some sort of lack of needing to. Like, America has been economically in charge since 1945, and people come here to speak our language. People come here to go to our schools, although that's changing, but there's this perhaps lack of a need to work hard and to intellectually work hard, to be critical thinkers, to know about the rest of the world. And so when we came home, we experienced that viscerally. So we would get, "Thank you for your service," or "Did you kill anybody over there?" or "Was it hot?" And all of those questions are ludicrous and stupid statements, but on top of that, they would be expected to be answered in 2 sentences or less. And then let's go on to the baseball game, or let's go on to whatever else has happened. And there's this meme, this narrative in American history that I'm sure you've all heard about how veterans don't like to talk about their experiences. Well, that's total and utter bullshit. Veterans really, really want to talk about them, but they are denied very early on when they come home, and they learn very quickly that there isn't an interest in knowing what is done in Americans' names. Actually, Howard Zinn used to say there's no American flag big enough to cover up no flag big enough to cover up the war crimes of American history. So there's an incredible confusion, an inner confusion with veterans across the political spectrum. Veterans are Republicans, there's Democrats, there's Tea Party, there's anarchists, there's socialists. It's not just one size fits all in the military. It's an incredible microcosm of the American population. But to a T, veterans come home and are frustrated at, we were told this was such an important job. We were told this is the most important thing that we can do. We were told we're incredibly brave and strong and heroes and all this. And then we come home and the American people don't have a clue what's going on. They don't have a clue what we're doing. And a lot of us interpreted that as, I don't know, ignorance or actually not caring, just going through the motions. And this has been a real sea change since 1975. If we go back to the Vietnam War, that war had obviously a draft, but also had 600,000 American military personnel fight back and refuse, go to Canada, go to jail, literally stop going on patrols in Vietnam. 600,000. And that's a history that we don't hear about. And that history created an incredible amount of fear in the Pentagon. In 1971, President Nixon tried to invade Laos and Cambodia with ground troops. And he couldn't do it because 2 battalions literally refused. They said, we are not doing this. And so he had to pivot to an air campaign and started bombing, which created the largest anti-war protests in human history, not just American, but human history. So there's an entire legacy of anti-war and GI resistance in this country, dating back, in fact, to the French and Indian War before we were founded as a nation. And the Pentagon saw that and did all these internal studies after the Vietnam War ended. One of those conclusions that they came to was that the media provided images of dead American soldiers, and that had a profound impact on how the American people reacted. So at the end of every week, you would see a death toll, you would see video of Americans in firefights, you'd see dead bodies, and you'd see the names of every single person on the nightly news. Nobody in this room has seen a dead American soldier since 9/11. It is illegal to show it on television. There's been 2 dead Americans that have been shown. They've been shown in 2 documentaries, in Restrepo and in another war documentary. Until the Obama administration, it was illegal to even show the caskets coming home at Dover Air Force Base. So the Pentagon understood very explicitly, and they tested this out during the first Gulf War in 1991, and they understood that that to have an American military that's able to fight a counterinsurgency, long-scale counterinsurgency that drags on and doesn't have Pearl Harbors and D-Days and signing, surrenders on battleships. Those are great images, right? Well, when you don't have those, you have to find another way, and the choice they made was to completely disengage the American public. So they created an all-volunteer military. They decided to up the benefits. So one of the first things they did was they brought women into the military in 1973. They opened up about 40% of the jobs in the military to women. It was the first American institution to have equal pay for equal work, which is mind-boggling. The U.S. military is actually always ahead of the curve. 1948, African Americans were brought in full across the board. 2015, trans people are now allowed to serve in the U.S. military. It's a progressive institution. You can do what you will with that. To me, like, a bomb is still a bomb, even if it has a gay rights flag on it. But, that's an interesting discussion. One of the other things that the U.S. military did was they included benefits for children. So if you have a child, you immediately, now after post-1975, you get full health benefits, you get housing. So a soldier gets a house to have with his husband or wife and their children. And those children are covered with education if their father or mother is still in the military. So if you serve 20 years in the military and you have kids at the beginning, you are literally paying for their health care, their education, all that is taken care of by the U.S. military. And if you have a kid and you serve 3 years and you're thinking about getting out, good luck finding someone that's going to provide you health care, that's going to provide you access to education. So the military was very forward thinking in that, and that has been one of the reasons that we have 2.4 million Americans who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's less than 0.5% of the American population. During Vietnam, it was about 8%. And we all in this room know somebody who's a veteran of those wars, but you may not explicitly have had those conversations or even been able to connect that in your mind. And that's also a very intentional process. Because the less we talk about it, the less we have these conversations, the less critical we will be of our tax money. I used to do this talk in 2011. I used to go into high schools and middle schools, and we would take jars, and we would label 1 the environment, 1 healthcare, 1 jobs, whatever. And we label all these things that you could fund, and then we would give the kids all this change, and they could put them in the jars what they thought was appropriate. And then we would show them what actually it was, and so we'd have to bring out 10 jars from the military and a little cup for the environment, and it was a good visual to help folks understand. But one of the things that we talked, and these are 2011 numbers, but one of the things that we talked about then was that every single household in the United States had spent $15,000 only on the war in Iraq. So, you know, people asking why their student debt is so high, people asking why their home loans are so expensive. Like, you all have paid this. This is your investment. And I think part of that disconnect is a frustration by veterans of that. Look, we're actually all in this together, but there's only a small group of people that are actively engaged and thinking that they're participating in it and actually like physically going out and doing it. So by 2007, I was getting out of the military, and I didn't know what to do. In fact, the first job that I thought about doing was being a contractor and going like back over there to make $13,000 tax-free a month, because I made about $1,300 a month when I deployed as an active duty soldier, plus healthcare, and then contractors were making $13,000, $14,000, $15,000 a month tax-free. You could buy a house in like 6 months of work. So a lot of folks, and also when you don't have other job skills besides kicking indoors and shooting things and hiking long distances and not eating food but still being effective, So I looked at contracting right when I first got out, and my best friend, fortunately, he was also getting out, and he, mentally cold-cocked me at some point and was like, "You can't do this. It's not what you believe in." And so I tried to go to college, and I tried to start putting things together. But I was also like waking up in the morning, if I slept at all, and drinking whiskey with my coffee. And finding ways to cope with this haze. It wasn't like explicit. It wasn't like, oh, I'm having this nightmare of this experience I had. It would be more like I'm being chased through Baghdad by velociraptors. These like strange combinations of fear and anxiety and that started to permeate my waking hours, not just being there while I was sleeping. And so alcohol provided a pretty incredible comfort at the time, and eventually discovered marijuana, and that helped transition me away from drinking, which was seriously helpful. And yet I was in Wisconsin, so that was not something that was like, it's not like living in the West Coast. Like, it's hard to buy weed over there. But the process of that first year getting out and going to college classes was like an incredibly difficult process. I was sitting in the back of the room. I would never have come into a room like this. It's like there's only one entrance and exit. I don't know any of you. There's too many windows. It's too exposed. There would just be too many flags going on inside of me to be able to exist. So I would like show up before anybody else got to class, and I would be in the back of the room, and I would have like earplugs in, and I would just have like a notebook to be writing in and all these things to do, and I just had all these little things that I did to try to help me get through. And I started to slowly figure things out. I mean, I wouldn't say I was political at this point, but I remember taking like a history class and being disagreeing with the teacher about a few things, and knowing that I knew what I was talking about, and that being like a really confusing, frustrating experience to me. Like, why isn't the truth the thing that wins out? Like, why isn't that the thing that we accept? And about a year after I got out, I had just gotten a girlfriend and was like, by my own definition, really feeling more comfortable. And my father called me. This is right after Obama was elected, like 5 days after. And my dad was crying. And my father doesn't cry. Maybe twice in my life I've seen that. And he had gotten a letter from the Army telling me that I was being recalled to active duty to serve in Iraq for 444 days. And I was to leave in like 2 weeks, which meant I had to drop out of college and like give up my bartending job and break up with my girlfriend. I mean, just, your whole life is in order. And I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I wasn't going back. Like, I didn't have a community to support me yet, but I understood that what we had been doing was immoral and a violation of US law and international law, but more deeply just like wrong. And I remember staying up late, and I had to basically be this strong person for the rest of my family. Like, everybody else was flipping out and losing their mind, and I had to be like, it's okay, we'll figure this out. Like, I went into like military combat mode, and I was like, don't worry, step at a time, we'll figure this out. And I remember like Googling, strange that that's become like a word that we just use now. Brilliant. Bastards. I remember Googling late one night, something like Iraq veterans against, and the war came up, against the war. I was like, what is this? And so I went to it, and I see all of these veterans wearing military uniforms, which is like a big violation. You're not supposed to wear your uniform unless it's in perfect condition and you're in your unit. And so like all these triggers in my head from my military training are going off, like, these aren't real people, this is like not okay, what the hell? But I kept reading, and I started watching these videos, and there was this, what I now understand was this direct action called Operation First Casualty, as in the first casualty of the war is truth. And the direct actions were held in Times Square, outside the Capitol building in DC. We've actually held them in Seattle and Bellingham and Olympia now, San Francisco, all over the country. But basically took soldiers who are veterans, and we put our gear back on, except for our rifles, and went on patrol in the city, like we were in Baghdad or in Kabul or wherever. And then we had civilian allies in the area that we were operating that just looked like people who happened to be wandering down the street. And we treated them like we treated Iraqis and Afghans. And we would do that in front of, it scared the shit out of people. Like, you know, and we would come in and like start screaming and yelling and grab somebody and put a sandbag on them and zip tie them and then drive a vehicle up and throw them in the back of the vehicle and drive them away. And people are just like, what is happening here? You know, like, it just was this, it was a rupture in the normal narrative of what we're allowed to see and what we're supposed to be talking about. And watching those videos was just, I was just like kind of laughing. I was like, yeah, you deserve it. Like, this is exactly, you should be seeing this. Like, this is exactly what we do in your name, and you should be forced to see this. And I just wanted to be part of that. I wanted to meet other people who were willing to like do that. I had so much anger and so much feeling of betrayal and frustration and confusion. Like, all of my elders had told me this was a good path, and then I came home, they didn't even want to hear what I had to say, and now I'm supposed to like go on with things. And so I started calling some people, and like this community who didn't know who I was just activated. They were like, oh, you're in trouble? What do you need? Like, I had a woman named Sarah. I've never met her. She was in Arizona somewhere. She talked to me every night for like 4 months on the phone. Just like talking to me, helping me through things, you know, like, let's get you connected with the VA, let's get you, let's make sure that like your driver's license is squared away so that like, you can't get picked up by because at that point I went AWOL. So like, had I been stopped by like at a border or an airport or a federal official, then I could be put in jail. So I did a number of things. I created a petition, I created within the military, I also like created a VA or a Veterans Affairs claim, and there was a number of other things that I did. So all these balls were in the air and moving, but it was a process of like staying out of trouble until something changed, and it took 9 months. And through that process, I like became incredibly radicalized. And had I always think back to that, because had the military just left me alone, like that final thing, you know, if they just had been like, whatever, we'll just get some other kid from Michigan or whatever, my life would be so drastically different. But they just pushed one time too many and converted my life trajectory into doing everything I can to make sure that there's not another generation that goes overseas to steal resources from people and kill them. And I have evolved over the years to really, like, I don't have a political ideology that I subscribe to. I have ones that I definitely don't subscribe to. But I really kind of, I try to consider myself pretty pragmatic and try to come at things from like a pretty empathetic point of view, trying to understand where other people are coming from, why they might think the things that they do. I've become pretty, my work has really come to envelop not just war and militarism, but also climate change, and very specifically climate justice. I had the privilege of going back to Afghanistan and working with Afghan peace volunteers who are like young youth who are basically challenging the US military, challenging the corrupt government, challenging the Taliban, challenging the warlords. They're like all sides, and these are young people doing direct action in a civil war. And you know, I kept talking to Afghans and Iraqis and asking, like, what can we do? How can we help? How can we make things better? And they would always say, go back to your country and fix your country. Stop coming here and trying to fix us. Like, so that's been kind of my pathway. Has been like, how do we, like, I believe in direct democracy, and I think that this country has an incredible, we have an incredible people. Like, we are the most giving people. When there's a tsunami or there's a disaster somewhere in the world, our country gives more individual numbers, not just like total money, but like the amount of people that participate in like trying to help. So I really believe that this country is like full of really good people, and I think that our media is a disgrace and is really a massive letdown. The fourth estate is like necessary for the other three to work, and yeah, I think that, you know, I've been involved in a lot of different political work over the last 7 years, and I still do work with veterans on a daily basis because I think that there's something special and unique about people willing to put themselves on the line, even for a horrible idea. We don't have a lot of ways to become a man in this culture, and so for me, as a young boy, I viewed the military as a transition, as a way to become a man. And I've heard from many of my fellow female veterans that there's similar feelings, that they didn't know how to like become a grown-up or become an adult. And so I spent a lot of time thinking and trying to figure out what does that look like to help our youth transition from, you know, being caretaken for to like being caretakers or being like leaders in our culture, without having to go somewhere and hurt other people to do that, without having to use violence. And I just want to also say, like, I'm absolutely not a pacifist. I have no problem with self-defense, and I would never tell. So for example, I'm a nonviolent organizer, and I also have friends in Iraq and Afghanistan who defend themselves in militias or in national liberation struggles. And their circumstances are much different than my circumstances. I live in this country, they live in those countries. It's a different discussion. I think sometimes, especially in like the West Coast, we get in these like strange debates about diversity of tactics and different language like this, and I'm like, you're losing sight of the point, which is like, find what you love, stand up for it, build your front line, grab a community, and don't let go. So yeah, I guess I'll end there. If you all want to, I don't know if anybody has any specific questions for me, but I kind of like ran all over the place, like I usually do. But I want to make sure, like, I know you folks had some questions about that the specific divide between like military and veterans, and I'd love to talk about that. I could talk about my own family and how that evolution happened, and so yeah. Turn it over to you all.
We usually do.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, please do whatever.